Hello everybody, wonderful to see you all today on our Anahata chat. We're introducing to you today a really dear friend of ours, Chelsea Green, who is a local homeopath and many other things, which we'll give her a moment to explain. And we're going to be talking a bit today around fear and the nervous system and how we are all managing in this current lockdown situation and how we feel about coming out of it. There's a lot of fear around the idea of coming out of lockdown and what the new world is going to look like for us and how we're going to acclimatize to it. And today's really about how from a yogic point of view, a mindful point of view, a homeopathic point of view, we can support ourselves to come out of this with as much ease and grace and kindness for ourselves and others. Just as important to consider how other people are feeling in all of this. And that's kind of what today's chat's loosely about. So I'm going to introduce firstly Daniel, my business partner in Anahata. So he's just going to say a few words about what he does for those of you that don't know him, and about a little bit very in brief around the topic.
Thank you, Dawn. Yes, so my name's Daniel Groom and I co-own Anahata Yoga Centre with Dawn. I'm a qualified yoga therapist and offer yoga therapy, specialising in working with people with stress and anxiety related conditions and illnesses. And I also supervise others becoming yoga therapists, as well as offering classes and yoga therapy in group and one-to-one sessions at the centre. I've found this whole period really, really interesting because it made me realise that actually most of what the yoga practice is about understanding and managing your fears that you've been, that have affected your past and that continue to affect your future. And what I've realized is I've learned a lot of tools through the 20 odd years that I've been practicing yoga, but I've never had to apply them in a situation that's been a pandemic where everybody has been going through similar things. And I think for me, what I've learned is that I've had to adjust. All the things that I knew were going to helped me to a point, but actually I had to keep listening internally and keep listening to also to those that I'm close with to notice how I was changing and being affected, to then learn what intelligent things I needed to then bring into my practice to continue to support me on a different scale. And I think that's been the big difference for me, is that everyone else has been also going through this as well. And I've been working with clients who are all going through the same situations. And we have almost had to have started again. And for me, I've been grateful to be able to have those tools and to have those resources around me, and also to have been able to work with other people. So I would say for me, that's been the big thing that I've kind of focused my time on. And I'll speak about that a little bit more as the conversation goes on. Maybe now would be a good time to introduce Chelsea to this conversation as well. As Dawn said, Chelsea is someone that Dawn and I have worked very closely with over the last few years, and it's been a real pleasure getting to know her and being able to pass on clients, specifically female clients who Chelsea specialises in, from my perspective, to be able to maybe hand them over to someone who has a more insider view about how to look after yourself from a female perspective. So I'll pass you over to Chelsea.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Dawn. It's a real honour to be invited here by you both today. So yeah, I'm Chelsea Green, and I'm a holistic hormone specialist. So I work mostly with women, but also with men. And I use tools like homeopathy, herbs, nutrition, lifestyle measures to help people create hormone balance. So initially, listeners might be thinking, what have hormones got to do with fear and the environment in which we find ourselves in at the moment? But the truth is, quite simply, it's everything. Our hormones are affect so many functions within the body, and they affect our immune system and our mental health. So all the neurotransmitters in our brain, our ability to feel calm and our ability to feel happy, all of that can come back to hormonal balance. And whilst I do work with women, this is also true for men as well. But yeah, I find this situation that we're in interesting, because I really truly believe in empowering people with the knowledge and the tools to look after themselves, to be their true healthiest, happiest, fittest version of themselves, so that they have good immune, so that they have good mental health. And through all of this, we've not heard anyone talking about it. And, you know, the government have been talking about it, health organizations haven't been talking about it. So I found it really interesting from that point of view. And, you know, everyone has the power to use things like homeopathy and nutrition and lifestyle measures at home to support themselves, both now and, you know, when lockdown ends and we come out of this and we go back to whatever normal is. So that's, yeah, that's my thinking on it.
It's really wonderful, Chelsea. Thank you. There's such a depth of knowledge that you bring to the table. It's really good to be able to share that with people. And you're spot on when you say that we haven't been hearing about how we can look after ourselves. All we've really been hearing is stay shut down, stay in your home. It feels very panicky. And my experience of working with clients and, you know, obviously my extended family is that people are really, really afraid. You know, they're frightened of what's going to happen next, you know, if they get it, if they're carrying it and they don't know. And no one's really having the conversation about how we can make sure that we're the healthiest we can be mentally, physically and emotionally. And I think COVID is really taking people to a place of fear that they've never gone to before. You know, in our society, being very poorly, potentially being around people who are dying or who do die, or our own mortality is not something we talk about. In the Western world, it's very covered over. So we're not prepared for that. We're not prepared for the idea of end of life, or our family's end of life. When it comes, it's something that people don't really know how to handle, and so it's terribly shocking. So magnify that by millions all across the country, where everybody's suddenly having to face their mortality and the potential mortality of those they love and care for. There's an epidemic of fear. And whilst, you know, I'm not in disagreement with the idea of staying locked down at all, or distancing ourselves and being careful, I am also interested in a little discussion between us around how damaging to us is living in a fearful state. I mean, from what I understand from my own practices as a mindfulness teacher and a yoga teacher and a cranial sacral therapist, that when the body is in a fearful state, our immune system really flatlines, and so we pick up everything and we get sicker and we feel iller. And that's on one level biologically, but then also socially our circle becomes smaller, and we see threat everywhere. So we're on a state of high alert, or adrenaline kicks in. I know you're going to speak about that, so I'm not going to labour the point. And I guess the question is should we be fearful? Is being fearful a bad thing? And how can we manage our fear in a way that is going to help us rather than hinder us as we go forward? So Chelsea, is there anything you'd like to say first around that topic?
Yeah, I mean, living fearfully is not helpful to us on any level. It's good to have an awareness of what's going on and an awareness of what we can do to protect ourselves. But living in fear, as you said, it affects us on a physical level, on a mental and emotional level. So I think really we want to be putting practices in place that help us to build up our emotional resilience, that so we can better cope with fear and stress and anxiety. when we live in a stressful world, there's no denying that, and we lived in a stressful world pre-COVID, and so stress is not going away, and we can't remove ourselves from this situation that we're currently in. So we want to be doing things that are going to help us to build on our emotional resilience, so that we're not drawn into that fear, so that we're able to just observe without judgment, which I think you and Daniel are probably better attuned to speaking to. But yeah, when we have that emotional resilience, when we put in practices like looking after ourselves, eating well, sleeping well, exercising, spending time in nature, practicing mindfulness, we build up this strength and this emotional resilience, and then we don't go into that fear and panic state.
How would you say fear shows up in our biology as human beings?
Yeah, so when we're exposed to fear or stress or threats or any sort of negativity, it creates a stress response in the body. And the really important thing to remember is that stress is not necessarily, it's not purely physical. It can be a perceived stress. So when we're watching the news or looking at social media and we're just bombarded with all this fear and negativity, and this person's breaking that social distancing law, that creates a stress response in the body, because the brain is always looking for danger. So it's looking to protect us. So even though it might not feel stressful to us, to the brain, that recognizes that piece of information as stress, and it creates a stress response in the body. So the body releases hormones like adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. And what that does is it basically puts us in a fight or flight mode. So the heart rate and blood pressure increase, and arteries narrow, our senses become more acute. We have stored sugar in the body that gets dumped into the muscles so that we can fight or flight. And all non-essential functions will get switched off. So metabolism, reproduction, digestion, all things that aren't essential to keeping you alive in that very point in time will be either slowed down or switched off. The body's just trying to keep you alive. And so it diverts energy away from non-essential functions into all those functions that are going to keep you alive. But of course, the threat's not, a roaming tiger. It's a 24-hour news cycle. And we're exposed to this all day, every day. So eventually that's going to show up for us in the body in physical form. So that might look like sleep disturbances. It might look like period problems, headaches, digestive issues. It might look like anxiety or depression. And it also might look like a change in behaviours. So maybe like excessive eating, excessive drinking, excessive shopping, internet use, anything that is going to distract us from feeling what we don't really want to feel. But in actual fact, we should be honouring and sitting with those feelings and acknowledging what we're feeling. Mm. Yeah, so we need to be doing things, like I said, that to help us build our emotional resilience. So going back to basics, eating well, eating nutritious foods, sleeping well, exercising, and doing those mindfulness practices, because we're not designed to live in this state of fear. We're designed to live in that parasympathetic rest and digest state. So we want to be doing the mindfulness practices to encourage the body to get used to moving back to that parasympathetic state. And when we can do that, that's when we don't go into that rabbit hole of fear.
Excellent, thank you. That's really really helpful. And I think if people weren't aware that there was more than one state to be in, then they had some power over that. So if they were having a wave of anxiety or fear, that there are things that they can do to bring themselves out of that state, so they don't have to inhabit it. It's not a given. But we'll talk about that more later. Daniel, I know you've got plenty to say about this from the yogic point of view. You're a very experienced yoga therapist. What would you like to share?
It's really funny. Well, thanks, Dawn. What Chelsea was saying, I completely recognise so many of those traits within myself have come up over the last couple of months. I would say pre-COVID, I felt like I was coping quite well. My anxiety was quite manageable. And then just before we went into lockdown, I would suggest that personally, my anxiety went into overload. And I recognised so many of those traits that Chelsea was just talking about. And I continued to do the things that I knew, and they wasn't really touching the sides anymore. So I went from suddenly feeling quite manageable to suddenly completely out of control. And for me personally, I had quite a strong reaction that was stress induced, whereby I experienced past trauma that had kind of been suppressed, or I felt like I was managing. But because we were faced with this situation that felt completely out of control, it triggered stuff in me that actually I didn't know how to cope with very well. So it was really interesting to hear what Chelsea had said. And for me, I found what I needed to do was exhaust myself through some form of exercise, and then allow that exhausting myself to then let me have some decent rest, because my sleep was all over the place. And for me, I know as a yoga therapist, that's one of the first things I ask someone is, how's your sleep? What can we do to improve your sleep? Or, you know, what is the quality of your sleep? And that gives me a very clear indication then of how their mind is. And by understanding how their mindset is and how they may be able to approach how to get more rest and sleep, especially in this situation that we're all going through and coming out of, then actually what it then allows us to do is to pick certain practices or ways that that person can take care of themselves to start to soften some of that fear that they're experiencing. Ultimately, for me personally, I've needed to get much more rest. That's what I needed to do. And so I've introduced an extra half an hour every day where I do a yoga nidra practice with my teacher. And for me, that's hugely comforting because it's connecting into a community of people that I feel comfortable and safe around, and also gives me half an hour in the afternoon where I can switch everything off. So I switch off all devices, I switch off all ways people can contact me, and just allow myself that half an hour to just have some rest in the afternoon. And I've noticed actually my anxiety has gone down, my sense of fear, but also needing to know what was going on has reduced as well, because I feel things are more under control. Now that's speaking from my personal perspective, but actually everyone will have experienced different things through this process, which is why yoga is such an amazing tool for dealing with fear and anxiety and stress and imbalances in our bodies, because everyone needs something very different. So it may be that you need something really physical. It might be that you need something really grounding and stilling. It might be something that you really need to focus your mind on, whether it's your breath or a mantra or a meditation, or maybe you need all of those things combined in half an hour, you know, to give you that fix that you need. But that's really the beauty of what yoga can offer is a way of looking at yourself from all different angles and giving yourself some tools to be able to feel like that you can get yourself through that situation.
And would you say when you've been working with your clients through this period, because I know you've continued to work as a therapist online, that they have managed to use some of these tools that you've recommended and self-soothe themselves?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the clients that I've been working with, I only took on one new client through the whole of this process, because to me, I didn't want to take on new people where I was learning new tricks myself about doing online therapy. You know, because I had an existing client base, it was very easy to transfer some of those people online. We'd had relationships for years that we could very easily and succinctly transfer onto an online offering. But I've noticed actually, since going online, people have wanted to talk more. They want to tell people how they're feeling, and maybe they want to talk outside of their immediate family and group of friends, because they're the people that they've been seeing or speaking to the most. So I would say we've shifted a little bit more into talking more, but actually keeping practices really simple. really, really, really to the point, and allowing people to know that it's okay to have these days where you feel completely emotionally drained or all over the place, unable to get on your yoga mat, or unable to do your run, or unable to cook that meal for yourself. And that's okay to experience that. And I think many people haven't been through this process, well, none of us have been through this process, but we haven't had these such different moving things going on in society that are affecting everybody, and for us, and for the practitioners, or the people that have been coming to yoga therapy with me, it's been a way that we can commune with each other and connect with each other. So I'm actually really grateful for them, because they've helped me through this process as much as I've helped them through this process.
Yeah, I totally hear that. I mean, looking at all of this from a mindfulness point of view, which is my personal main practice, I kind of, for many years, I mean, as most people know, I've been practicing mindfulness for 30 years now. And so the kind of the lifeblood of the practice is in my DNA. I've been well prepared for impermanence and, non-clinging and non-attachment through our daily moment-to-moment practices. But even although I have all of that to support me, there have been moments where it's been challenging. For me, I wasn't very well. I had the virus early on and sort of been quite poorly for about 8-9 weeks. And truly having to surrender to not being able to do anything, not being able to work, not being able to get up and cook. I'm a very busy, proactive person, and to have to literally just sit down and rest was torture. It was just my idea of hell. And having to just literally lay in bed, sleep, wake up, surrender to, I've just got to lay in bed for another day, and that went on for weeks, was it was a really, I viewed it as a practice. After I stopped whining about feeling ill and accepted that I was ill and I just had to get on with being ill, the practice became acceptance of, well, this is my state. In mindfulness and in yoga, we're encouraged to arrive in each moment fresh, because each moment is fresh, to arrive in each moment with complete openness and acceptance of what's there, because we can't change it because it's already arrived. So we don't have the luxury of winding back time and doing something different with it. We can certainly use the current experience to change our future experiences, and by acting with more wisdom and more kindness and care for ourselves and others. But what's arrived right now, all we can do is accept it and be peaceful, be calm, and be wise with our actions going forward. So I kind of had to practice moment to moment complete surrender to my own ill health. And because of that, I would say I haven't really, apart from the first few weeks where I was in a bit of a bad mood about being ill, I haven't really experienced great suffering. I really have to kind of sank into, this is what's here, this is what I'm going to live with, and this is my normal right now, and brought as much kindness to myself and others as I can within that. So I feel very grateful that I had the knowledge to do that. What I've been seeing with the clients that I've been working with is a lot of struggling with that, but I don't want it to be like this, and it shouldn't be like this because it's not meant to be like this, and the government's got it wrong, and all the other things that everybody's getting their self in the right state about, which is completely understandable. But they don't necessarily have the skill set to surrender to, well, this is my reality right now, and how can I support myself within that? Because when we accept what's here right now, we don't suffer. We don't have that internal anxiety and fear arising. Fear doesn't arise if you're in acceptance, because you're not projecting into, well, what if it's still like this tomorrow and next week and next year? You're staying here, you're staying present, you're looking after yourself in this moment, which is the only one that's relevant anyway, because we can't change the future and we can't change the past. So I'm experiencing with clients a huge amount of suffering because they're terrified about what the future is going to hold, and terrified that their actions are going to impact on those that they love. And if they go out and touch something and come home, they're going to kill somebody. I mean, the stories that people are telling are, you know, shocking. You know, it's like listening to people that are living through some kind of horrific war. So the work that we've all been doing together is grounding work, you know, grounding us and bringing us into the present, you know, through walking practices, body scan practices, self-compassion practices, where we invite ourselves to, you know, speak kindly to ourselves and to others, and to be patient, and to do things that nurture us, and, you know, just take the time to slow everything down. Because if we're in that kind of fast, speeded up kind of, I'm going to be super productive in this time, and I'm going to learn a language and learn how to bake and knit a sweater and all the rest of it, then actually you're just heaping more expectation onto yourself. So not to not use the time for fun activities and things you might want to do, but not to burden ourselves with more than what is needed, because actually our nervous system's in a situation that it's never been in before. None of us have lived through a pandemic before, certainly no one my age, and therefore we don't know what to do with it. We're in whole new virgin territory. So that's what I've been doing from a mindfulness point of view, is practicing acceptance of what's here and now, self-compassion, compassion for others, and not getting into that place of projection. Is there anything else that either of you would like to say before we move on?
I think, you know, what you raised, Dawn, is a really valid point about acceptance, and accept, like you, especially when you said accepting that you were ill, because we don't want to be sick. It doesn't fit within our scheme of things that we've got to do today. But if we can accept what's going on and view our symptoms as signs from the body that something's out of balance and that we're not happy, that helps us with that kind of acceptance, because that's what symptoms are, that it's your body's way of letting you know that it's not happy with something and something's out of balance somewhere, and you need to take a look at what's going on. But the other thing I wanted to talk about, if I may, is critical thinking skills. Because what I've seen, similarly with my clients, like you were saying, people getting into this narrative of what is and what isn't, and what's right and what's wrong, and everything. But before I go there, you know, if I explain what's going on in the brain, you know, the brain's constantly trying to keep us safe. It's always on the alert for danger. And so we've had, what is it now, 10 weeks of this unseen evil coming to attack us. And so what happens is that heightens our natural evolutionary behaviours. So behaviours like becoming resistant to change. So we're inherently designed to fear the unknown. So when with the children going back to school, for example, that might bring up really strong feelings for you. And also you're going to be, it's natural for us not to want to take risks, because we like to be safe in our comfort zone. And unless that comfort zone is threatened or there's a loss at stake, we're not going to move beyond it. We like to control our environment. That, again, makes us feel really safe. So, and also a good thing to remember is that the brain, the emotional part of the brain, that was developed a long time before the logical part of the brain. So even though we have a fully integrated brain now, any really strong emotion like fear is always going to triumph over logic. So that's what's going on in our brain. And then we go onto social media and we see a post, for example, that confirms our bias and our thinking and our feelings. We engage with that. And then the social media algorithm sees that we like that kind of post. It shows us more posts like that. And then suddenly it looks like everyone thinks the same as us and we've got it absolutely right. So we've got that going on. But at the same time, we have to remember that not everything we see on social media is true. Not everything, even in the news, is true. So we need to just perhaps take a step back and think about, you know, for example, who's writing an article? What have they got to gain from writing that article? Who's funded that study? you know, Google it. Is it even true? Is it fair? Is it reasonable? What's the other side of the argument? If you can understand the other side of the argument, then you're much better informed to make a real decision that sits true to you. So yeah, it's not a diss on social media or the news or anything like that. It's been really important in keeping us connected. It's just, you know, a tool for people to use to sort of be aware and do your research and just draw on your natural critical thinking skills. Because again, if you don't do that, you just end up in that state of fear and panic.
I realised I'd muted myself as the dog was sniffing at the door. that raised my level of anxiety a little bit. Oh dear. It's really useful to hear that. I think we're all guilty sometimes of doing the old scroll, aren't we? Like that, like endless.
Becoming a keyboard warrior.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree with that. I'm going to share it. Yeah.
And getting ourselves in the right state. But you're so right. You know, I always say to my children when they bring some news article or something, I like, well, research it first. Might not be true. You know, camera angles and as one person's point of view, it's so helpful. And actually, it takes the heat out of it, doesn't it? You know, when you say you've got to have that balance. There's always no one's always completely right. No one's always completely wrong.
Exactly. Yeah.
Really, and it's wonderfully calming for us when we take that on board. And I would say, you know, I would say rather than limit the amount of time that you spend, as in saying, I'm going to have an hour off, I'd say have a half hour on and have the rest of the day off. You don't need to be on it a lot, you know, don't limit it. Just, you know, it's a minimal amount of time, you know, have the most amount of time in your personal physical interactions, the things you're doing with your hands and your body and face to face, you know, gardening and walking and cooking and doing your job and speaking to your family, but get off social media and the news and, you know, say, all right, I'm going to do it for half an hour a day and then I'm going to put it down. And that's how I manage with it, because otherwise I'd be doing the old 24-hour scroll, I'm sure. Daniel, before we move on, is there anything you want to say around that stuff?
I was just reflecting upon what Chelsea just raised, and I think the essence behind our yoga practice is ultimately to understand our minds. Our mind is a direct reflection of every action and reaction that we have or experience within our bodies or around our bodies. And by using the example of social media, and just think one post that you read could trigger a whole cacophony of different things to happen within your body and within your mind, may take you back to things that have experienced in your past and may make you very fearful about the future. And that has took less than a moment for all of that to happen. And I've realized through this process is this realization about just simplifying as much as I can. And that's the advice that I've been offering to most of my clients, is if you're struggling, just try and make your life more simple. Find ways of uncoupling stuff just so you can have more time to notice how and why and what you're experiencing through all of this stuff that's been thrown at us and that we're choosing to go and look at. But also those things, you know, many people are having to do many things that they've probably not done before or have been outsourcing for years. Or, you know, for the example of, you know, people teaching their children schoolwork. You know, I mean, literally that in itself is a massive learning for so many people. And on top of that, they're trying to do their job. They're trying to run their house. They're trying to worry about, you know, what's going to be for dinner. There's jobs that needs doing. There's, you know, parents to look after. There's other family members you might be worried about. There's all of that going on. And all of that is causing so much response within ourselves that no wonder people are feeling overwhelmed and exhausted by this process. And that's what I've needed to do to look after myself. And that's what I keep telling all my clients is just how can we make life simpler for you? What can we do to cut some stress away for you so you've got time to actually realise what's happening rather than it just being this constant bombardment and then going to bed at night and feeling like your brain has suddenly been plugged into the mains. There's so many people I've spoken to have said they've been having crazy dreams, really vivid dreams. They've been dreaming about things from their past that they haven't thought about for years, you know, or quite traumatic things have been coming up in their dreams where they've been having really anxiety-led or fearful dreams. And that's very good news or knowledge to yourself that there's a lot of subconscious or unresolved things passing through your mind. And for me, simplicity just seems to be the key forwards at the moment.
I really hear that. I mean, I think the way I've tried to view this as much as possible is the whole thing's a practice. It's a practice to get to know myself better, to have more breakthroughs, because what we know as practitioners is that out of pain and suffering is incredible potential for growth and breakthrough. It's when we're at our most vulnerable, our most sad, having our most deep challenges, that if we allow ourselves to be with them and to feel into them and to look after ourselves in those times, that it's at those moments when the most powerful and incredible changes are our potential. But what we see often is exactly the opposite happening, is that people have suffering and fear and all of the biological stuff that goes along with that, you know, the palpitations and the overthinking and the bad dreams and the poor relationships and all the rest of it. So they start drinking more or eating more or doing whatever it is that they can to distract themselves from how they're feeling. But actually the invitation is to stop and to feel, you know, feel it into your body, feel into the distress and discomfort and be alongside it and make space for exploring it and understanding it and soothing it rather than trying to push it down. Because what we know is that on the other side of that is a reservoir of incredible peace and love and interconnectedness. And so this whole experience could be an incredible practice and a potential for a deep awakening and a deeper understanding of yourself, if we allow it to be. Speaking of connection, I think that's something that's worth just a brief, you know, we haven't got a huge amount of time left now, 5 minutes or so, but a brief discussion around, you know, people are now disconnected. They're away, unless they're on a screen, they're not getting to have that social interaction. Some elderly people who are on their own and haven't got anybody coming to see them, aren't seeing another face, you know, at all. So Chelsea, from your point of view as a therapist and a practitioner, how important is physical connection and community?
Gosh, it's hugely important. Hugely. We're hardwired to be sociable and connected, and we know that, for example, if a sick person cuts themselves off from their community, that they're moving further away from health. And we know from research that social connection is a better indicator of health than obesity, smoking, and high blood pressure. So it's hugely important. And we get a really important hormone called oxytocin from connection, which is all about love and trust and bonding and compassion. And it's the hormone that will counter all the negative effects of stress and of, you know, living in a fear-based society. So yeah, hugely important.
Daniel, do you have anything you want to add to that?
The notion of connection, I think, has been changed for many people. And And I think what I've noticed within people and within myself is ways that we can connect that we may have dismissed or we might have not seen as being connective enough. And actually, this is all we've had. So therefore, we've had to make the best of it. And one of the most powerful things I've taught many of my clients is that time when you're feeling low, when you're feeling like you're missing someone, give yourself a cuddle. Find a way that you can raise that hormone and chemical within yourself by giving yourself a big hug. And by doing that, we then allow ourselves to self-soothe or offer kindness to ourselves in some way. And isn't it lovely now that we are starting to be able to see a wider group of people, and how that in itself is throwing up a whole cacophony again of emotions and feelings, and both positive and negative sensations that are coming out of that kind of moving out of lockdown into what is our new normal.
Just to bring my stress levels up again, someone started drilling outside the window. That's the joy of living on a main road. Yeah, I hear that completely. Another really wonderful way to practice or to release oxytocin in the body is to acts of kindness to others. So is there something kind we can do? We might not be able to physically be with them, but is there something kind we can do for another person, for our neighbor, for our community, for somebody in our home? And the more we do for those outside of ourselves, the more oxytocin is released. And you know, people who are kind to others, research has shown, live longer, live healthier lives, live happier lives, and they're more fulfilled, they're more resilient, they're stronger, because their funnel isn't so narrow. So if you can't physically think of something to do, you can, in your meditation practices, you could practice sending kindness to a specific person, you know, holding them in your heart, thinking of them, thinking of a group of people, or even if you feel you have the capacity, you know, your whole community or the whole world or all beings, you know, holding that wish that all beings experience the end of mental suffering. And when we do that practice, we say the words mental suffering, because we know that everything comes through the mind filter. So whatever your experience is, whatever is coming into your awareness hits the mind first, and then the body picks up the stimuli from there. So we always wish for others to experience a peaceful mind. And so you can do that. You know, you can sit in meditation for just a few minutes and send out loving kindness and that wish for other beings. And that in itself is going to engender a sense of love and connectedness. So we see ourselves and our community as we, not you and I, not other. Which I've certainly been doing more of that. I mean, I always do it's called Metabhav, and the Metabhavan practice, I always do it every day. I've certainly done more of it over this time. So for me, that's been really useful. I think we're coming to the end of our talk, which has been, as always, fascinating. I love talking to you, Chelsea. You just know everything. Always make me. I don't know anything. I just bring you up. What do you know about?
Hardly.
Is there anything either of you would like to add to end our conversation? Anything you want to say?
I had a question for Chelsea, actually. From a homeopathy perspective, what would you recommend for people who are maybe experiencing anxiety or fear at this moment?
Great question. I actually have with me a little homeopathy kit. So anyone could have one of these kits and use it themselves to help themselves at home. And you just comes with a booklet and all the remedies. So we've got lots and lots of remedies around fear, and the idea is to narrow it down, because it's an individualized form of medicine. But one of the most important remedies, and certainly my most prescribed remedy through all of this, has been a remedy called arsenicum. it is a very fearful remedy, quite restless with the fearfulness, but it's fear of germs, it's fear of contagion, so of catching something, fear of diseases, fear of dying. It's a big element of arsenicum. And really interesting, when arsenicum goes really deep into arsenicum state, you see miserly hoarding behavior. So if you think right back to the beginning with all the panic buying of toilet paper and stuff like that, it was a really well indicated remedy. And also actually all the remedies have a big mental emotional picture and a physical picture, and arsenicum's a great remedy for flu like symptoms, like what we saw with coronavirus as well. So that's been that's a really, really useful remedy to have at home for fear and anxiety, especially around germs, catching disease and death.
That's really useful. Really useful to know. And where can somebody get one of those kits, Chelsea?
So this one is a Helios kit. Helios is a homeopathic pharmacy. Anyone can order this kit. It's just called the basic 18 remedy kit. There's another homeopathic pharmacy called Ainsworth. They have a bigger kit. I think it's 12 or maybe 16 remedies. Or if you're in doubt, just message me. I'm happy to help you out. I can get them at a slightly discounted rate for you because I can buy them in bulk. So if you go on my website, it's just Chelsea Homeopathy, and drop me a message. I'll sort that out for you.
And we'll be putting up details of your website, and you do an amazing newsletter, which I always really enjoy. I sit down with a cup of tea. Actually, no, I'm lying. I sit down with a coffee, but I'm not supposed to drink coffee, am I? I sit down with a coffee and enjoy your newsletter. It's always really, really, really beautifully written. And Chelsea sees people one-to-one in her clinic in leigh-on-sea, but I know she's working via Zoom, I think it is at the minute. So, yeah. And she really, really supported me massively with homeopathy through all this. So deeply grateful for that. I know I'm not sure where I would have been without all of that. So thank you. So thank you to Chelsea for joining us, and to amazing Daniel for being here to co-host this and share some of his incredible wisdom as always. If there's a topic you would like to see discussed on one of our talks, then please maybe leave a little message in the comments, and we'd be really happy to discuss anything. Everything's worth a good old chinwag, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So thank you for joining us, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you online soon, and hopefully back in the studio before very long.
Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks again, Daniel and Dawn.